Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are starting our next session from adverts to narrative, the shift towards story driven branded content. For this session, I'd like to call our moderator, Joydeep Biswas, CEO, Rocked Films. As a panelist, we'd like to call Mr. Sandeep Buddhiraja, Director and Promoter, Spark Sensory Research. Mr. Niranjan Kaushik, Chief Content Officer, Fingerprint Films, and Mr. Jarvis Pereira, Advisor, One Asset Exchange.
Good afternoon, everyone. A warm round of applause for our panelists, please. Let's dive quickly into this. Let's start by getting our panelists to introduce themselves. Niranjan, would like to go first?
Yep. Thanks, Joydeep. Hi, guys. Thanks for coming here. My name is Niranjan Kaushik. I am the Chief Content Officer of a company called Fingerprint Films. We are a production house. We do long-form advertising, short-form advertising, and feature as well. In fact, we've just finished a Marathi feature. Personally, I write and I direct, and I started off as a copywriter with Ogilvy and Mehta way back in the 90s. And that kind of tells a lot about what my age is right now. But yeah, and then from being a copywriter, then I moved on to being a creative director, and I've worked in India, Singapore, and South Africa. And about 5 years ago, I started directing, which was a natural sort of path for a copywriter turned creative director to take, and you start directing. And very recently, I just finished directing my own web series for Disney Hotstar, which is a Telugu show called 9 Hours. And having been someone who's actually seen both the world of advertising and, advertising was essentially very client-driven content is what we used to do. And from there, creating complete fiction, which is content that audience loves to watch. I think it's an extremely interesting journey and it's an extremely interesting time to be here right now and, doing what we call branded content, which is content that is driven by brands, funded by brands, but exist not because of the, how the brand is shown, but because of the story that, the makers tell and the story they kind of tell that people want to hear and how they beautifully, magically weave the brand in. So beautiful times and so hope to have a wonderful session. Over to Sandeep.
Sandeep?
Yeah, I have around 20 plus years experience, working experience, because I'm not sure that justifies me being here, but I would say I dig consumer insights, how consumers work, what do they want, and that's why I worked in advertising, I worked in market research, I've taught advertising. I would say branded content has to happen. It's not even a question of whether it would happen or not, because attention spans are getting shorter. People are very difficult to get hold of. How do you differentiate? How do you get across your message? Thank you.
Yes. Hi, I am Jarvis Pereira, more easily remembered as JP. Right now I'm an advisor with One Asset Exchange. We are looking at the tokenization aspect for film and various other blockchain initiatives. I also started a company in 2017 called Digital Quills. Its focus is in branding from a B2B perspective, which makes for a very interesting case studies, especially when you have clients in pharmaceuticals and mining consultancy. So that's why I'm here today, and yeah.
So taking this ahead, as they say, necessity is the mother of all inventions. And perhaps the most relevant phase was the COVID-19 phase, where brands shifted their focus essentially towards content marketing because traditional ATL kind of took a backseat, and they were looking at new avenues to create ROIs and creating new IP through content IPs. So taking the thought further, I just want to ask, how do you see the evolution of brand advertising from the traditional ATL medium back in the day to branded content as it is in today's market in India? So Niranjan, do you want to take that first?
Thanks. So I'm going to date a lot back than even COVID and go back to a time when, I've grown up at a time when there was just one channel on television, and then as we grew a little older, there were two channels. There was DD1 and DD2, and those were very different days. And I had no idea I would land up in advertising at that time. I was a student in school, but those were days when you would actually watch television and we would wait for advertising to show up, because the content was so good and there was very limited exposure other than that single channel we had. And in fact, what we saw on television, which was either news or there was this Marathi program called Amchi Mati Amchi Manus, so compared to that, the advertising that we saw was a lot more refreshing, was a lot better. So we would actually look forward to ads. And from someone who sort of grew up at that time, looking forward to ads, and I've seen the progression of that becoming two channels, and then suddenly satellite TV comes in, and you have like 40 channels, and then OTT comes in, and what happened is I've actually seen advertising die a very slow, painful death, and that is because everything else that was available for people to watch became a lot more interesting than advertising. And therefore, at some point, there came a need where advertising felt that it needs to keep up and it needs to stay relevant. And we are at that point right now where advertising is struggling and has to struggle. I mean, it's justified in order to stay relevant to the audience, because now they don't have Amchi Mati Amchi Manus alone. They have 50 other things, and they have platforms and they have shows from all over the world. So somewhere advertising needs to keep up, and for a brand to stay relevant, it has to now actually start crafting stories and start crafting content that people watch because they love the story, because they don't know what's going to happen next, which is a sense of suspense, because they love the characters, they're invested in the characters. And then it becomes our job, for creators' job who work with clients, on how we can, seamlessly weave a story, the starting point of it being a brand. And it has happened a lot abroad. It has happened to a reasonable extent in India as well, but it's still not as prevalent as it should be. And what has happened more often is what we call in-film placement, where first the film gets written and then they say that चलो ये फिल्म में motorcycle predominant part है, या ये फिल्म में soft drink predominant part है. Now which soft drink or motorcycle manufacturer we can approach? That's a slightly different approach from what is actually happening, and this is even stronger way to do things. Is you actually go to the client first, and the client, that's what we do at Fingerprint. We tell the client that आप बताओ, आपको अगर आप Enfield है तो आपको बुलेट market करना है, then we will take that and we will create a story that is actually built around the bullet. So then the story comes out of the brand and not vice versa. The brand doesn't get fit into a story. But when we create that story, we of course constantly map on what is audience watching, what are the shows that are trending, who's the target audience, what is the target audience, and make sure that what you create for the brand has all those tick mark points, that a non-branded piece of content will have. And once we have all that, at no point do we want it to look like an advertisement. At the same time, the brand has to be prominently featured. So that's what we struggle to do. It's a struggle, but it's a wonderful struggle at the end of it, because eventually when this becomes very big, we're all going to be patting ourselves on the back, saying we were at the start of something that was amazing. So yeah, that's my point.
Sandeep?
One of the things which has changed and which makes, I'm not saying that branded content is here and it will take over, but nowadays you don't have, one of the things which has shifted in lower middle class, I'm not talking upper middle class or upper class, is that today you do not have only one screen. There is only one TV at home, but today the son and the daughter have their own screens and they watch separately. So if you go around your locality and see the guy, the banya who delivers goods to your home, his guy comes on a cycle and is on his phone and he's watching something. So today you can't reach people through a 30-seconder. It's almost become impossible. So you have to change. The time is there. It has to change. There is it. But on a separate point, Indian advertisers tend to be using a principle of CYA, cover your ass, very clearly. They don't really experiment too much. They don't want to take the risk. If you don't take the risk, the branded content is not going to happen. As Niranjan pointed out, that you have to write a story with brand as the hero. If the brand just happens to be placed in a movie, it doesn't work. Means it works to some extent, but it doesn't work that way where you are the star. For that, you have to experiment, and you also have to have budgets. There are also a lot of 200, 500 crore brands which can seemingly look big when they do 30 seconder or even a 15 seconder on a national television, which they would have to forego. They would never be, they can't say, look, in the same social circle, look, I've done my ad and it's on TV. They would have to do experiment. And in the last point, it has to be niche. It will be targeted. It cannot be mass. So you cannot have another mass movie which is targeted at, or a mass content which everybody gets. Thank you.
Right. Jarvis?
I'll bring in a bit of a Web3 perspective here. So there's a lot of focus towards hype marketing and in a very very short span of time, and of course everyone's vying for attention. It's not easy to, for those of us that have watched Doordarshan, I mean we would remember very well washing powder Nirma, the Little ad, Gold Spot.
Right, right.
It's like good times, right? Today there's no relevance with that in a younger generation. So in a lot of ways, what's happening right now is just being able to hype it up, but the narrative is also shifting from the big budget productions to how do you do it with a lower budget. In the lower budget, I think what happens is the narrative gets flipped, where you're looking for fans to interact with the brand and post that content, right? And to then share and keep creating a virality effect to that. So this is one of the ways I'm seeing a trend that comes in, especially when it comes to the hype build.
Okay, now this next question is a little bit of a, kind of a part one of the first part. So how has branded content been impacted, especially with the rise of social media and social media stars? Because social media stars play a very, very important part today. What you call influencer marketing, content creator space, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
So it's a good question and a scary question at the same time, because what happens ultimately, and we've had this more often than not. So I just spoke about how we approach it from a story first perspective, and how the brand fits in beautifully into the story, and then comes the conversation of इसमें hero कौन है, इसमें heroine कौन है, acting कौन करेगा, and then we say let's now leverage existing social media stars to act in our show. Then the question, unfortunately, because we're still not as evolved in marketing departments across the country, understanding the power of this. So the next question immediately becomes, अच्छा ये है तो अच्छा है, इसके कितने followers हैं? अभी that is a little bit of a risk, because now if you're signing him on the basis of his followers, you're not staying true to the story, because the story might have him dying in the second or the third episode, or he might be a serial killer or whatever, and then will that become a negative aspect? So the users of influencers when it comes to fiction is tricky. But if you are doing content that is non-fiction, and if it is purely influencers endorsing a product, then it is very effective, and then it really boils down to how they do it, and there the onus of creating the creative often lies on the influencer. And how, so I've seen content where influencers have created 20-minute videos as well about brands, but then that remains very impromptu, and because they don't come from a strong advertising background, they do not understand how a brand needs to be portrayed, and so that is the risk of it. But in fiction, it is extremely scary to rely entirely on influencers. I'd rather, still when it comes to fictional story-driven branded content, I would still stick to the traditional approach of finding the best actor for the role, which we do, even if it's non-branded and even if it's pure fiction.
Sandeep, your take?
What's also happening is that Gen Z is actually shit scared of people trying to sell to them. They don't like people selling to them, and they can figure out when an influencer is also trying to sell to them. Influencer marketing and how it works is a separate 1 hour, 2 hour discussion topic, so we'll not get into intricacies of that. But what point Niranjan had said, it has to be story driven. It has to be something where the brand is flawlessly integrated into the story. Anything which influencer does, and there were really some stupid influencer briefs of saying 5,000, 50,000, 5 million thing, but that's a separate discussion. But content, yes, Instagram is today creating a lot of branded content, and which has a thing. But another great point Niranjan made, that would a brand like Montblanc want that kind of thing, which is very clear on how it has to be presented? They don't want every influencer to pick up something, and so you can't. If you go to a Montblanc showroom, they will not. If you're the first time there, they will not sell you the most expensive pen because that's not how they want their journey to be. But that's not influencers understand. And the challenge here again is that Gen Z doesn't want things to be sold to them, and they can figure out when a video is trying to sell something to them.
Right, Jarvis?
Actually, that's Sandeep. That's a fantastic point. Gen Z definitely doesn't want selling, short attention spans. Yet there is a reliance on influencers with certain types of brands, with certain types of products where it does work, because not everybody wants to do the heavy lifting, right? Not everybody wants to think or do your own research on a regular basis. And with Gen Z, especially, this is rampant, right? They would rather find out from an influencer that, hey, you know what, you've done all the math, right? Just show me what the final score is, right? So this, with certain products, it can be positioned such, but I'm certain with brands like that are more like Montblanc and so on, right? It's not the way to go. It's really not the way to go. There you want a sort of maybe an endorsement module or whatever, but I'm not giving you a solution because this is not for free, right? So yeah, really to do with product position, and you'd know exactly how to get to your audience.
Okay, now talking from the perspective of the brands, what do you think are the challenges in too much in your face messaging via branded content? So a lot of times what happens is the brand expects you to fill in number of minutes per scenes and so on and so forth without realizing that they're disturbing the content. So how do you tackle that? How do you see that, Niranjan?
It becomes extremely important for the creative team and the filmmaking team to work in very close conjunction with the marketing team at the brand's client office, because at no point does or should it look like there's a brand sale happening, and it has to be organic, and that can never happen. Now if the client, you know how back in the day Unilever used to function like that, and when we used to work on that, Unilever would say we don't want to come to the shoot because we're not allowed to come to the shoot, and then when we eventually present a film, they'd say, but we didn't come to the shoot, but this is wrong, this is right. So that's been a constant battle here. All the more it becomes the joint responsibility of the team that's creating it and the team that's commissioning it to work together and say कि इतना ही brand in your face होना चाहिए और इससे ज़्यादा नहीं होगा तो exactly like Sandeep said, nobody likes being sold to, more so Gen Z and Gen Alpha and even millennials for that, but even Gen X's like us, we don't, if technically, we have been hardwired to not open the door when a salesman rings the bell. So it is in our DNA to not respond to someone trying to sell someone. So in that, it becomes extremely necessary for both departments, like I said, the one that's commissioning it and the one that's creating it, to work together to make sure that this far and no further. And as long as it, yes, I agree with your point that there has to be an Excel sheet कि अगर हम 30 minutes का episode कर रहे हैं तो उसमें 12 minute brand दिखना चाहिए. That's a fair ask because it is the brand that is functioning. But how and why and how is it even shown should not be like how advertising does it, because that's really where advertising unfortunately fell on its face, because it became too much of a direct sell, saying ये है हमारा product और इसको लीजिए and then इतने पैसे में लीजिए. So that's not the best way to have someone invested in your story and your brand for over 8 episodes. And when you're saying 8 episodes, 8 into 3, you're talking about 240, 250 minutes. It's a lot of time to ask from someone. So at no point should it feel like there's a hard sell here. It has to be a soft sell. But having said that, sell aside, you have to make sure that whoever's going to watch it is watching it for the content and not for what it's trying to sell.
Sandeep?
Picking up from what Niranjan was talking, means it is something which is from a brand perspective. You have people, most of the brands in India at least, would have the marketing heads and the category heads who are heading that. All are MBAs, all are left brain. They are all. You do not actually have too many people who appreciate the creativity. Now, I'm also unfortunately or fortunately an MBA. To appreciate creative takes slightly different things. They are used to, so like not naming a brand, but there are people who, there are brands and the companies which say your brand has to come in the first frame, then it has to come in the fifth, second, then they're basically guidelines for that. You'll have to forget all that once you want to get into branded content, and there is no option. There is, branded content would have to happen. You'll have to do things differently. Doing things differently is another challenge. We don't like doing things differently, and but it like there was somebody from Mondelez, I think the global content leader for them, Laura Henderson. She said we've experimented with all kind of ads. Now we know we need to get into branded content. The biggest challenge is internal. Biggest challenge is not to get people like him who can do great things, but to get it accepted among first among marketing, then among finance people, saying you're wasting money. We don't even know. You put this episode, spend so much money. What is it? ROIs would take a backseat because ROIs would have to take a backseat.
That was my next question, but you've answered it well. Jarvis?
These are two tough acts to follow in the same thing, and they've really, really encapsulated what is to be there. I don't think I could contribute more to this particular question.
Okay. So moving on, the next question is: can you think of any brand? Now this is a little tricky. Can you think of any brand associations in recent times that were a bad fit according to you, Niranjan?
Was a bad fit.
Bad fit.
No, unfortunately not. But can I talk about
Sure, you can.
what was a brilliant fit? And in fact, the very first, earliest rather, not very first, the earliest set of branded content, you'll be surprised, was created 10 years before YouTube was created. And those were those BMW short films, if you remember. So BMW films, so I mean, you could just look it up, if you just type bmw.com films. So BMW actually launched a production company. This was 10 years before the invention of YouTube. So there was no digital, there was hardly any internet. And they launched this set of films, about 8 films. They were short, but they were about 10, 15 minutes long. Each film directed by a very well-known director. There was Guy Ritchie, if I remember, for sure. There was Spike Jonze. There was Wes Anderson. And they also had the topmost stars acting in those films. And all the 8 films, I mean, I would love it if all of you go and watch it. All the 8 films in that campaign were, stories written around BMW. So it was to actually showcase the performance of the car, the looks of the car, how it performs under certain conditions when you have to speed, when you have to brake. But you watched it for the stories it told, and some amazing. So this was even before, viral was a thing. They created films that people just forwarded to each other on email. And, I'm talking about the days when in our Ogilvy office around out of 4 computers, just one had access to the internet, and we would all sort of queue up on that to just watch this, because someone had received that mail. And then BMW has, and then they, very recently, following the tradition, I think about 6 months ago, they've launched another film called The Calm, which is amazing. So it's a sequel, literally after maybe 15 years or a little more, and this one's gotten like over 1 million plus views already, and is trending like crazy right now. So that BMW, so talking about brand fit, so BMW has used it extremely well. Western Union has created some very interesting non-fiction branded content where they have about, they started with 8 films which they commissioned. What they did was they took people, real people, to tell their stories. So they took people who went to other countries and worked in order to make a living in another country, and then they actually over 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, captured their entire life on film, and they actually made them talk about how they use Western Union to send money back home, because there's a boy from Philippines working in Los Angeles, there's a boy from China working in the UK, and how no matter where you are or who are you and where you're working, end of the day, across countries, across geographies, Western Union's your money transfer partner. So that was again a beautiful, and you watched it not because it was a Western Union film, you watched it because you really, it was extremely interesting to see, a non-English speaking Chinese cook working in like proper London. And you watched it for that. So this branded, so several brands. So I mean, these two come to mind, top of mind right now. There's something called the Macau Resort. If you just type Macau Resort Martin Scorsese. So there's a Scorsese directed film about, so it's called The Audition, yeah. Brilliantly used again, so right fit for the brand. So what it features Robert De Niro and Leo DiCaprio. And what the story is that Martin Scorsese calls De Niro and DiCaprio to this resort to audition them. And the entire film is shot around that resort and that casino and resort, and it literally showcases every little aspect of it, but you're watching it because of the intensity, because of the story, and you want to know who wins the audition. You don't want to know how the brand is featured, but while you're watching that, somewhere subliminally you say that, okay, if I have the money and if I have the wherewithal, this is the casino I want to go to because this is all they have. So some amazing examples there. Bad fit, I unfortunately don't remember because I avoid focusing on the bad.
Okay. Sandeep, you want to take that?
There is
Bad and good. Both the flip sides.
I'm a negative person, so I'll go with the bad.
Sure. Let's hear it.
There is a recent ad, and which is an ad which is supposedly a more a branded content because it's a 2 minute 30 second, and 2 minute 30 second doesn't qualify as an ad. It was for a brand Tanishq, which is it's a good thing that somebody is experimented, but it's very difficult to figure out what's the role the brand is playing in that, because you could put another jewelry brand and there would not be anything different over there. So yes, but it's a longer piece. It's a very moving piece. They try and move. They put in emotion, so you feel that piece, and so it's an attempt. I don't think it's a great attempt, but it's an attempt. One of the classic cases of using, and I'm talking CSR advertising, which is done by Nike. Nike had done a famous campaign called Chalkbot. So it was done when Lance Armstrong survived cancer, and they said you could put a chalkboard for somebody who was a cancer survivor, and we will paint it on the Tour de France race. Only problem with that content was that there was Nike almost everywhere. The Nike logo was more prominent than the campaign. And when you're doing something as emotive as somebody is a cancer survivor, and then you put Nike all over the thing, that was overdone. So that's something which is when you do branded content and it's a great content because if you've seen the chunky campaign of Lifebuoy and all, which that's moving, and Lifebuoy keeps very smartly till the end. Moment you try and do any CSR campaign and you want the brand to come from the first frame, then you have an issue. Obviously, somebody in their advertising agency would have told them that, but brands are brands.
Jarvis, good and bad.
So a great ad. I mean, in the same line with this, I think it was. Was it Greenply or Tata? I'm struggling to recall, and it's only because of my memory. It's not alluding to the brand, not the brand not being strong. There was this fantastic play on which they had children who were drawing, with crayons, and then eventually showing what sort of world is out there. And I found that pretty moving because that was one of the few ads that actually managed to keep my attention till you watch till the end, right? That little story that unfolds as to the kids want to inheriting a generation from their parents, right? And I found that absolutely fascinating. So this social impact and then the reveal at the end, yes, 100% it works because you did not know who was doing that.
Right.
In terms of bad fit, without the story content, I still am trying to grapple, even though I saw this a few months ago, what Jean-Claude Van Damme was doing on top of two Volvos with the split. I haven't figured that out yet. If anybody does, please just let me know.
Okay, now the next one is a bit of the last kind of it's a nugget which will lead to the next question. So there was this, it's a kind of case study. There was this Marathi film called Guru, starring Ankush Chaudhary. And that film had, when it first released its promo, it says, Bagpiper Soda presents. So basically what the brand did, or what Group M did, was they created the character of Guru around the persona and the communications of the main character of Ankush Chaudhary. And the entire script of the film basically told the story of Bagpiper soda, whiskey, or however you want to perceive it. And this led to the entire film, feature film in Marathi, being funded by Bagpiper Soda. So, do you think it's possible that this can happen at a regular, kind of a scenario where, we can easily go to a brand and say, hey, this is the story. Let's, would you like to get into the communication of the script and the narrative, and would you like to fund the film? What's your take on that?
I think absolutely possible, and I'm more than certain a lot of brands will be interested in doing this because everyone is seeing the change of why people are watching content, and the more intriguing the content is, the more they watch it. So, in one of the previous sessions we heard, I don't know how many of you heard that, but there's a certain film by Ajay Devgan or any big actor that completely sets the box office on fire, and there's another film released a week later by the same big star, and that one practically does nothing. And that goes on to prove that it is, at the end of the day, the content is king. And increasingly more and more brand managers and brand heads and brands will start recognizing this, and ultimately boils down to when someone approaches them, how receptive they are and how strongly have you written the concept around the brand. And if you genuinely come from a space of we've written this script and this brand should present it because we had this brand in mind when we wrote this, then I see no reason why any brand head or any brand owner should say no to that, because it's a fabulous opportunity just waiting to be picked, literally.
Sandeep?
I think it will take time. It's not going to happen immediately. While there will be people who will take risk, early adopters would go for it, but the large mass has structures which are there. So companies which have structures, which have decision-making metrics. Question is, yes, if you appeal to the marketing head of a category in Unilever and he loves it, and then he can think. But if you go through the low, takes it to them, and then by the time your idea gets lost, so it will take time. It's also that brands have to sooner or later start changing their structures on how they want to communicate. It would come from multinationals. It will also come from some of the Indian business houses. But this is the The challenge with branded content is that there are thousands of brands advertising. Would we have thousands of branded content which can be made in a year which will do justice to thousands of brands?
Probably not. But just to add on to that, Sandeep, I see the Indian business houses moving faster on this than the multinationals would, because multinationals have their systems in place and they have their international partners to answer to. But like a local brand like Haldiram or Bikaji or someone like that would be more than happy if you actually go to them with something relevant, and I hope that happens sooner than later.
It has to happen. There is no option on that. But only thing to add is that there is something which people haven't really thought about the branded content, that it might last for years. My positioning as a brand changes after 5-7 years and I move on to a different tangent, while the branded content, if done very well, can live on for 15 years, 20 years.
No, I think this opens up a very interesting point. It opens up a very interesting avenue. Production costs today can be looked at as, doesn't have to be very high budget, so long as you have the right sort of filmmakers to be able to craft your story, right? At the same time, for those that want to have a larger budget, it's an interesting trend that you're seeing ultra high net worth individuals who want to have a movie made in which their own players are within, right? Like my wife has fancied it, my children may have decided that they want to be actors in a movie, and it's on my bucket list and I can afford it, so let me go ahead and do it. And this opens up a very interesting avenue of what can happen on long, short, mid, and I guess somewhere there in through this very fact that you have this channel, we'll be looking at a different trend, a different shift that's coming in for positioning as well.
All right, gentlemen, thank you for your time. We've just run out of time. We'll leave this for another day, another longer discussion, because I think this can happen as a masterclass for a couple of hours and we can keep going. Thank you so much for your time and your insights into branded content. Looking forward to seeing you all again at another conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Joydeep, and thanks, Rashmi. Thanks, audience.
Thank you, Jaideep, and thank you, esteemed panelists. Now I'd like to call Anisha Rihana to present Token of appreciation to our panelists, please. Thank you.